You don't usually expect a physics lecture to feel personal. You expect formulas, equations, a distant kind of intelligence that lives somewhere far above your everyday life. But then something shifts. You hear a voice, calm, almost playful, and suddenly it feels like someone is speaking directly to you. Not at you, not over you, to you, about the way you think, the way you doubt, the way you try to understand a world that often feels confusing, unpredictable, and quietly overwhelming. And that's where this story begins. Because what happened in that final lecture didn't just change physics. It changed the way people think about thinking itself. And if you stay with me, you might notice something strange, something subtle, starting to shift inside your own mind too. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly, permanently. You've probably felt it before, that pressure to understand things quickly, to have answers, to not look foolish, to appear certain even when you're not. It starts early. In school, you learn that the right answer matters more than the process. That confidence often gets rewarded more than curiosity. That hesitation looks like weakness, so you adapt. You start pretending you understand things before you really do. You memorize instead of explore. You repeat instead of question. You protect yourself from the discomfort of not knowing. And over time, something important gets buried. Your natural curiosity, your willingness to say, I don't know, but I want to understand. That's where Richard Feynman began his last lecture, not with physics, but with something much deeper, intellectual honesty. He didn't speak like someone trying to impress you. He spoke like someone trying to free you, because he understood something most people never fully realize. The greatest barrier to understanding isn't complexity. It's the illusion that you already understand. Think about that for a moment. How often do you nod along when something sounds right, even if you couldn't explain it yourself? How often do you accept explanations because they feel familiar, not because they're actually true? There's a quiet psychological mechanism at work here. Your brain is constantly trying to reduce discomfort, and uncertainty is uncomfortable. So when something sounds plausible, your mind relaxes. It says, that makes sense, and moves on. But Feynman warned against this. Not aggressively, not critically, gently. He pointed out that understanding isn't about recognizing words or patterns. It's about being able to rebuild an idea from the ground up in your own mind, without leaning on borrowed language. And that's where most people struggle, because it requires something we're not used to practicing. Slowing down, sitting with confusion, admitting, even to yourself, that you don't fully get it yet. There's something deeply human about avoiding that moment. Because confusion feels vulnerable. It feels like exposure, like standing in a room where everyone else seems to understand, and you're the only one who doesn't. But here's the truth Feynman quietly revealed. That feeling is where real understanding begins. Not at the end of confusion, but right inside it. And if you think about your own life, not just in physics, but in relationships, decisions, emotions, you'll start to see the same pattern. How often have you accepted explanations for someone's behavior because they sounded reasonable? They're just busy. They didn't mean it. That's just how they are. But deep down, something didn't fully sit right. Something remained unclear. And instead of exploring that uncertainty, you moved past it. Because staying in that space felt uncomfortable. Feynman would have paused there, not to judge you, but to invite you back into that moment of curiosity. Because clarity doesn't come from rushing forward. It comes from turning back and asking, slowly, patiently, do I actually understand this? And if the answer is no, that's not failure. That's the beginning. One of the most powerful ideas he shared wasn't a formula. It was a mindset. He believed that if you can't explain something simply, you don't truly understand it. And that sounds straightforward. But when you really sit with it, it becomes unsettling, because it challenges something many people rely on. Complex language as a shield. You've seen it before. In experts who speak in complicated terms that sound impressive but feel distant. In explanations that seem deep but leave you more confused than before. And people who dominate conversations not by clarity, but by overwhelm. And maybe, if you're honest, you've done it too. Used words to fill gaps in understanding. Repeated ideas you hadn't fully processed. Not intentionally, not maliciously, just as a way to stay safe. Feynman stripped all of that away. He wasn't interested in sounding smart. He was interested in being clear. And clarity requires courage. Because when you try to explain something simply, you expose the parts you don't fully grasp. You can't hide behind complexity anymore. You have to face your own understanding honestly. This is where the lecture begins to feel less like physics and more like therapy, because the same principle applies to your inner world. How often do you use vague explanations for your own feelings? I'm just tired. I'm stressed. I don't know why I feel this way. And those statements might be true, but they're not complete. They're placeholders. And sometimes they protect you from going deeper, from asking harder questions. What exactly am I feeling? Where is this coming from? What am I avoiding? Feynman's approach wasn't about having all the answers. It was about refusing to settle for incomplete ones. He once said something that feels almost deceptively simple. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Let that sit with you, because it changes the entire direction of responsibility. It's not about other people deceiving you. It's about the quiet, internal ways you might be deceiving yourself. Not out of weakness, but out of protection. Your mind is constantly creating narratives to make sense of your experiences. And those narratives feel real. They feel solid, but they're not always accurate. Sometimes they're shaped by fear, by past experiences, by the need to maintain a certain identity or belief. And once a narrative forms, your brain starts protecting it, filtering information to support it, ignoring details that challenge it. This is where things become dangerous, not dramatically, but subtly, because you start living inside an interpretation rather than reality. Feynman's message was an invitation to break that pattern, to question your own certainty, to gently challenge your own assumptions, not in a harsh, self-critical way, but in a curious, open way. What if I'm wrong about this? What am I not seeing? What would this look like from a completely different perspective? That kind of thinking isn't easy, because it requires letting go of control, of certainty, of the comfort that comes with feeling right. But it also creates something powerful: freedom, the freedom to learn, to grow, to adapt, to see things more clearly than you did before. And here's where it connects back to you in a way that might feel unexpectedly personal, because this isn't just about science. It's about how you move through your life, the decisions you make, the people you trust, the stories you tell yourself about who you are. If you never question your assumptions, you stay trapped inside them. If you never examine your beliefs, they quietly shape everything you do. And if you avoid the discomfort of not knowing, you limit your ability to truly understand anything, yourself included. There's a moment in Feynman's thinking that feels almost rebellious. He rejected the idea of blind authority, not out of arrogance, but out of respect for truth. He believed that no matter how respected someone is, their ideas should still be tested, explored, questioned. And that's a radical idea when you apply it beyond physics, because it challenges something deeply ingrained: the tendency to trust confidently presented information, especially when it comes from someone who seems knowledgeable. But confidence isn't the same as accuracy, and authority isn't the same as truth. You've probably experienced this in subtle ways: taking advice that didn't fully resonate but felt convincing, believing explanations that later turned out to be incomplete, following guidance that didn't align with your deeper instincts. Feynman's approach would have paused in those moments, not to reject everything, but to engage more actively, to ask, does this actually make sense to me? Not on the surface, but at a deeper level. This kind of thinking changes the way you listen, the way you learn, the way you interact with the world. You stop being a passive receiver of information, and you become an active participant in understanding. And that shift is where transformation begins. If you've made it this far, there's a good chance something here is resonating with you. Maybe you've noticed moments in your own life where you accepted things too quickly, or times when you avoided asking questions because it felt uncomfortable, or even patterns in your thinking that you've never fully examined before. That awareness matters more than you might realize, because most people never pause long enough to notice it. And if you want to keep exploring ideas like this, ideas that quietly reshape the way you think, feel, and understand the world, you can stay connected here, not because you have to, but because you're choosing to remain curious. And that choice changes everything. Let's go deeper, because the most profound part of Feynman's final lecture wasn't what he said about physics. It was what he revealed about uncertainty. He didn't fear it. He embraced it. He saw uncertainty not as a problem to eliminate, but as a space to explore. And that's almost the opposite of how most people live. You're taught to seek certainty, to have clear answers, to eliminate doubt. But certainty can become a trap. because it closes the door on further understanding. Once you believe you know something completely, you stop questioning it. And when you stop questioning, you stop learning. Uncertainty, on the other hand, keeps you open. It keeps you flexible. It keeps you aware that there's always more to discover. And that mindset doesn't just apply to science. It applies to your identity, your relationships, your beliefs about the world. Imagine approaching your life with that same openness, not needing to have everything figured out, not rushing to conclusions, not forcing clarity where it doesn't yet exist, just staying present with the process of understanding. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you aware. And awareness is powerful because it allows you to see things as they are, not just as you've been told they are, not just as you've assumed they are, but as they actually are in this moment. And from that place, your decisions become clearer, your thinking becomes sharper, your sense of self becomes more grounded. By the time Feynman finished that lecture, he hadn't just explained physics. He had modeled a way of thinking, a way of being, one that values truth over comfort, curiosity over certainty, clarity over impression. And if you take that with you, not as an idea, but as a practice, you start to notice subtle changes. You question more. You assume less. You listen differently. You think more deeply. And slowly, almost without realizing it, your relationship with the world begins to shift. So the next time you hear something that sounds convincing, pause. The next time you feel certain about something, look closer. The next time you don't understand something, stay there a little longer. Because that space, the one you've been trained to avoid, is where real understanding lives. And once you learn to stay in it, you don't just understand physics differently, you understand everything differently, including yourself. And maybe that's what made that final lecture so powerful. Not that it gave people answers, but that it gave them permission to keep asking.